Hello, Assalamu alaikum, Namaste, Sasri Akal. Good afternoon, viewers, and our honorable guest. I am your host, SM Irfan Tahir on World News TV UK. Today, our topic is journal discussion about local issues and the Kashmir conflict. Without further delay, let me introduce my distinguished guest, Mr. Liam Byrne, MP, Shadow Minister, Digital Culture, Media and Sport, Digital Economy, and Shadow Mayor of the West Midlands. Uh, just a brief introduction of Mr. Liam Byrne and brief history. A former cabinet minister, Liam served in Her Majesty's Treasury, where as Chief Secretary to the Treasury, he designed the UK's fiscal consolidation strategy in 10 Downing Street, where as Cabinet Office Minister he coordinated cross-government programs to combat the great financial crisis for Prime Minister Gordon Brown, and in the Home Office, where as Minister for the Police and Counter-Terrorism, uh, and then Minister for Border and Immigration, he led the total overhaul of the UK immigration system. Liam, welcome in our show.
Welcome. Thanks so much for inviting me along.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Liam. I just try to start with the will the May election prove to be as accurate and timely as you expect in this unpleasant coronavirus environment?
I think it should be fine. I mean, lots of people are deciding to vote by post this time because lots of people saw the American elections and they saw how postal votes were key to getting rid of Donald Trump. So if people Google postal vote, it will take them to a very easy way to sign up from postal votes. The elections will be in about the second week of Ramadan. So many people are going to choose, I think, to vote safely for free from home and vote early. But, you know, in the West Midlands, we love elections. So, you know, elections are, a time when people like to talk about politics, like to talk about their communities, the things they're frustrated about, the things they'd like to see changed. And there's a good tradition of voting in large numbers in large parts of the West Midlands. So we're allowed, I think, back out on the doorsteps next week, and I can't wait.
That's great. Why should the people of the Midlands leave Andy Street and vote for you?
It's simple, really. There's a big choice in this election. Do we go back to what we had before COVID, or do we strike out in a new direction? Now, Mr. Street is a nice chap, but his plan is just to replace the jobs that we lost during COVID. But for most of us, in most of our communities, that's nowhere near good enough. And the truth is that healthy life expectancy was actually falling before COVID, even though it was going up in the rest of the country. We had more people, not less, living in the most deprived communities, and violent crime had doubled. So literally, life was getting shorter, poorer, and less safe. I don't think that we should try to go back to that after all that we've been through. So I think that we need to build back fairer, and we need to build back stronger. And crucially, we need to build back greener. But crucially, we need a mayor like Andy Burnham who's going to stand up and fight for our region, fight to get our fair share, fight for more investment in our young people, battle hard for jobs, and crucially, work with the Police and Crime Commissioner to put more police back on our streets so our communities are safer and stronger. So we've worked really hard over the last year listening to residents about a plan for the region. We've had thousands and thousands of people talk to us about how they would like to see things done differently. So the plan that we're putting together, it's genuinely a people's plan. It's a plan that's been written by the residents of the West Midlands. And I have to say, it looks fantastic.
As a metro mayor, how would you support the third sector, voluntary sector, who are doing the grassroots work at the moment?
Yeah, so there's the third sector has been crucial, especially over the last year. So, as you know, I've worked with homeless people and food banks a lot over the last few years. And it's very often our local third sector, whether that is mosques or community groups, that have really made the big difference. So we need to do a couple of things to support them. So one, we need to create a right to food so that we support local community groups who are feeding those who have nothing. Second, we need a homelessness bill of rights to set out the rights of people who are homeless and therefore help community groups in their work there. But then third, we need to be championing the community spirit by investing more in grassroots sport, putting in pitches in parks, backing our local football clubs. It's those local groups that help bring us together, but it's such a battle for them at the moment to try and get the money they need to do things. And that's one of the reasons I'm standing for mayor, because I'd like to make that a lot faster and a lot slicker.
That's wonderful. Liam, Birmingham is a multicultural city, but it is felt by many that unnecessary BAME lives have been lost during COVID. How are you planning on the building that trust with the communities who have lost their faith with the politicians who appear not to have the care for them?
Well, there's a couple of things that we need to do. One is that we need to make sure that everybody is safe and vaccinated. That's the first priority. At the moment, in the poorest wards in Birmingham, the vaccination rate is 50% worse than the richest wards. And that's because we're not using our community pharmacies to make sure that people can get a jab round the clock and round the corner. I've fought a long battle this year with the Department of Health to get the data public, because I know that the data would reveal where we've got vaccination cold spots. And so that battle has to go on. We have to make sure that we're now using our community pharmacies to make sure that everybody is safe, because the truth is that none of us are safe until everybody is safe. But then second, we've got to basically support people getting back into work. And the first thing I want to do is to start using public contracts to support our local small businesses. The public sector across the West Midlands spends about £20 billion a year on bought-in goods and services. I'd like to do an emergency audit to see which of those contracts we can actually place with small local businesses rather than big multinationals who are based outside the region.
That's fine. How do you feel about the Home Secretary Priti Patel's proposal to send asylum seekers to third world countries for processing? Will this include current asylum seekers who are already here waiting for their cases to be processed?
Well, I don't know what to make of her, really. I think we need a different approach in our region. I would actually like our region to be the first region of sanctuary for those who do need help. I think we should be learning from some of the work that's going on in our schools, who are becoming schools of sanctuary. I think that the approach that Priti Patel is talking about will be found to be illegal. I don't think it will be supported by our partners around the world. And, this is supposed to be the country of human rights. We were the people who wrote the European Declaration of Human Rights back in the 1950s to make sure that we never went back to the kinds of horror stories that we saw during the Nazi regime. We wrote the Human Rights Act for an important reason, which was to make it clear the rights of all of us. We've always been the champion of human rights. We should stand by that history and constantly seek to turn that history into practical change in the world around us. It's about justice for me.
Thank you so much. This is good thinking for the people. Birmingham City Council is moving towards a greener city. You already mentioned in your speech. In terms of its carbon footprint, the car scrapping scheme doesn't give enough cash back to those on low incomes to be able to afford more greener forms of transport. How will you support low income families to make that change?
Mm. Well, I've got many people who are, for example, taxi drivers or gig economy workers or delivery drivers who live in my constituency. So I know how tough some of these new rules will be. It's worth remembering that the clean air zone was not a great idea cooked up by Birmingham City Council. It was forced on Birmingham by ministers who literally ordered the city to follow this approach. So I think there's something that we can do as the mayor. I think we can create very low cost leasing of electric vehicles. So electric taxis, electric delivery vans, e-cargo bikes, and indeed e-bikes. I think that we can actually use the power of the public balance sheet to provide many of these services at much, much lower cost than anybody could ever get from the marketplace. And I think that could be worth a lot of money to people in Birmingham each year, because they then get the vehicle at a much lower cost, but then crucially, they also save on the petrol bills. So money is so tight now for families. So many more are having to use food banks because they're not earning enough to eat and feed their families. So we've really got to do everything that we can to try and lighten the load and lower people's bills for the tools that they need in order to go to work.
Thank you so much. Viewers, we will take a short break. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you so much, Liam, for your precious time. Actually, in your views, Liam, who's the responsible and behind this Kashmir conflict?
Well, I met with the Pakistani High Commissioner in Britain this morning to talk about exactly this issue. And, as you know, I've been a champion of the rights, the human rights, the fight for justice for Kashmiris since I entered Parliament 17 years ago. I'm somebody who was very proud to be the secretary of the all-party group on Kashmir when I first entered Parliament. And I've been amongst many of the protests over the last year or two as the brutal lockdown has just got harder and tougher. What I said to the High Commissioner this morning is, it remains my view that human rights are never a bilateral issue. Human rights are always a multilateral issue. And although it's not popular amongst everybody, even in my own party, I genuinely think that only a multilateral solution can deliver on the UN Security Council resolutions that were promised to the people of Kashmir all those years ago. So we have some short-term work to do to keep up the fight against this brutal lockdown, the cutting off of internet access, telephone access, media access. We've got to fight to improve transparency on the ground. But crucially, we've got to persuade our own government here to raise its voice much, much more effectively. At the moment, we have Boris Johnson talking about doing a trade deal with Mr. Modi in India. I don't think that we should be doing trade deals when human rights are being violated. I think that's morally wrong. I think it's bad, and I think it sends the wrong signal to the global community. India, in many ways, is at a crossroads at the moment. That founding vision of Mahatma Gandhi of the village democracy in a secular state is really in peril right now by much of the populist nationalism that we see promoted by groups like the RSS. We even have a situation now where judges, the media, lawyers, journalists are no longer neutral. They're being seduced by much of this very dangerous nationalist propaganda. So I'm genuinely worried about where India has reached in its history right now. And I don't think our government should be encouraging Mr. Modi in doing the things that he's doing. But that's what they're doing by offering a trade deal, by promising to go and visit. So I think that there is a battle that we have to continue to fight in our own parliament to get our government to do the right thing. We have to continue to raise our voices to make our views heard, as is our democratic right. But the fight for justice for the people of Kashmir will not finish until we've won. It's as simple as that, in a way. And so we know the hill is steep, and we know the road is long, but we're going to keep going, and we're never going to stop.
If we go to the history, some people say it is unfinished agenda of partition of subcontinent. Do you think that British government can play a role to finish the unfinished agenda?
I do. I mean, Britain is, thank God, no longer an imperial power, but we did cause the mess, and therefore I think we have a special responsibility to help clear it up. My reading of the instruments of accession that were signed in 1947 and the similar agreement tell me that India is in breach of those agreements, because the similar agreement, for example, said that there would be no unilateral action taken to disturb the constitutional settlement that was left in the 1940s. India has breached that with its recent moves. So it's impossible to pretend that this is simply a bilateral issue anymore. This is quite obviously a multilateral issue. And if one just is pragmatic for a moment, there have been about 300 violent conflicts since World War II. About 2/3 have been settled peacefully, but often the most difficult conflicts, whether in Yugoslavia or between Israel and Egypt, or in our own country in Northern Ireland, they all involved bringing in outside mediators. So people like the mediators, people like President Carter, who helped broker the Egypt-Israel peace accords, or Richard Holbrooke, who helped in Yugoslavia, or George Mitchell, Senator George Mitchell from America, who helped in Northern Ireland. It's often easier to get international mediation on some of the most difficult issues, and I think that could make a big difference trying to deliver justice for the people of Kashmir.
Liam, don't you think 70 years are good enough for a nation to suffer?
Much too long. 1 year is too long. 70 is completely unacceptable. And I think what is, most distressing, most heartbreaking to watch, is the way the violations of justice seem to get worse and worse. The way that basic human rights are just being cut off, the way people are being locked up without trial, the way families are being denied access or the ability to connect with others. This is a very, very dangerous situation, which is only getting more dangerous when countries like India decide to start bombing Pakistan. This just raises the temperature in a very, very dangerous way and makes it harder for us to see a path to peace and a path to justice.
If India or Pakistan is not ready for dialogue, then do you think British government can influence them by any mean to come on dialogue table?
Well, I think our influence is weaker now that we've left the European Union. But I guess the point is that we have to use all the influence that we have got. But that means we have to stop encouraging Mr. Modi from doing the bad things that he's doing. So that means we shouldn't really be talking about a trade deal without saying that human rights are central. We shouldn't be thinking about visiting India unless we are upfront about some of the issues that we're going to raise about Kashmir. So, there's no excuse for behaving in this way. It cuts against our own history, and it cuts against this basic injustice that's being perpetrated against the people of Kashmir today.
Liam, then what mechanism would you apply to resolve the Kashmir conflict? Do you have any roadmap for it?
The key. Well, there are three things that we need to do. So, ultimately, the United Nations needs to help author this process, and I do think that with President Biden's election, there's a little bit more hope for that than perhaps there was. So, the UK, as a member of the Security Council, could be proactively tabling these proposals for peace mechanisms. The second thing, though, that we have to do is we need a much better network amongst parliamentarians and members of the United States Congress. So there is now a very strong argument for justice for Kashmir in the US Congress as well as in the European Parliament. So at the global level, we need to be using our international political networks to organise more effectively, so that if you look at the way in which we secured a vote on Palestinian statehood, for example, that was a globally coordinated campaign amongst politicians around the world. But then the third thing we need to be doing is inside our own parliament, we need to be passing votes like the vote that we passed for Palestinian statehood. That was a very powerful moment. I had the honour of meeting the Palestinian Prime Minister not long after we voted for Palestinian statehood. And, what he said is that was a huge boost to the people of Palestine. That was a real a boost for their campaign internationally. So there are things that we can be doing in our own parliament that would help this cause. But we have to act global, but think global in the way that we push for peace and justice in Kashmir.
Liam, you have a strong grip on the Kashmir issue. We have no confidence on that. Do you think that the British government and United Nations can play its role in solving this problem?
I'm a great believer in politics. Where there is a will, there is a way. Ultimately, what is politics? Politics is the way that we come together as human beings to decide on the common good. That's why we had to invent politics. God has made each of us unique, but we are social animals. And therefore, we needed politics to figure out ways to live together in peace and harmony without killing each other. That's all that politics is. And politics is infinitely creative and flexible, but you have to want something in order to use politics to deliver change. I worry that the British government today wants to wash its hands of Kashmir. I watch their behaviour carefully. I watch their body language when questions about India's human rights violations come up, and they step back. It's almost as if they want to recoil from hearing the truth. So it's why, while Labour is not in government, we have to use our voices in Parliament, on the streets, in every position of power that we can access, to continue to make the case and to continue to make sure that the world never forgets and never looks away and remembers its obligations signed in the 1940s.
Thank you so much. And at the end, what is your message to the diaspora Asian community who are living in the whole Britain?
My message is really simple. We've been through an absolutely brutal year. COVID has hurt and killed many more people in the ethnic minority community than any other community. The heartbreak has been terrible, and very often we have not been able to grieve properly for the loved ones that we have lost. After all of that sacrifice, Let's not go back to the kind of politics that was failing our communities before COVID. Let's be bold. Let's be creative. Let's be imaginative. Let's try and be a leader again. Let's think about how we can genuinely bring jobs, bring homes, bring new opportunities for our young people. These things are possible, but you have to vote for it. And that's why it's crucial, no matter who you vote for, it's crucial that in the May elections you turn up and vote. I would urge you to vote for change.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Liam, for your precious and valuable able time. We will appreciate your feedback. Keep watching WNTV. Thank you.